Thank you for joining us for our fourth discussion about the book White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And last week I mentioned a survey to give feedback on what books you all would like to read next. And we had a good response. And these are the two books that were kind of the overwhelming winners. So we'll read next The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. And we're going to take September through December to go through this book. So we'll meet once a month. It'll be the second Tuesday of the month. And we'll start September 8th. And we'll just meet once a month, 4 times to talk about the new Jim Crow. And then in January, we'll start Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. So those will be the 2 books for the rest of the year. And please join us. Please tell whoever you would like to come and join us too. So we've had a pretty good turnout this time. Let's see. So today we will conclude the book White Fragility. And I'm just going to jump in this time and go to chapter 10. So DiAngelo in chapter 10 calls White Fragility the rules of engagement. And it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek beginning where she's saying, okay, here are the rules that we've all sort of been going by before we do this white fragility training and understand. And so she says, here are the unwritten rules that white people say that you must abide by if you're going to give me feedback on my something problematic I said or did, my racist patterns. Basically, first of all, just don't give me feedback on my racism, because that would mean that you're calling me a bad person, right? Proper tone is crucial. Feedback must be given calmly. You must trust, there must be trust, and the trust is that you trust that I am not racist in any way before you start to give me my feedback. Feedback must be immediate and private. I must feel safe. You must acknowledge my good intentions, and you must allow me to explain myself and my intentions until you realize it was your misunderstanding, that you just took it the wrong way. And so that is no longer where we want, our thoughts and assumptions to be. So this is sort of what she's saying, is the general dominant way that our unchecked assumptions are kind of guiding us through these rules. Here, I feel like this is a little more close to home, because here are the sometimes actually written rules that we as white people will want to adhere to when we're having conversations like these, or doing anti-racism trainings, or just, discussions of racism in general. We want to say, we're not going to judge, we're not going to make assumptions. And in the book, DiAngelo says those first 2 aren't even possible, because as humans, we're all going to judge, and we all have assumptions that we don't even know we have. So those 2 can't really be followed. We would want to say, assume good intentions, but as we know from reading White Fragility, that, placing intentions over impact is problematic and detrimental. And then this goes to the good bad binary. If it's so important to assume good intentions, I'm a good person, I didn't mean to say anything mean, then that means that we still think the good bad binary is true. Only bad people are racist and good people cannot be racist. Speak your truth, which is something actually, I mentioned last week, because that's in the Crucial Conversations rules, 4 rules of having conversations. But she's not saying that you shouldn't speak your truth. She says most people do speak their truth. She in her years of facilitating has never had to tell people to be truthful, but she says sometimes what you think is your truth may actually be a false belief. So you may actually believe that racism isn't a problem anymore in our society. You may actually believe that you don't see color, but we know those things aren't true. And so that leads to, I don't agree, that's not true for me, may actually mean I don't understand. So needing to pull back and see where your blind spots are. And then, that this needs to be a respectful environment, but often she says in the book, this isn't defined. And so what white people in a norm-centered conversation might think a respectful environment is no conflict, no calling out of racist patterns, focus on my good intentions. and then in shows of white solidarity where you're making others feel comfortable. Oh, I know you didn't mean to say it that way. You're a good person, and not actually providing feedback. And so where that may feel respectful to white people, that's going to create a hostile environment for people of color. So here are the rules that, we tend to want to cling to, but they may actually be problematic. And so here she says here are the real rules about feedback in particular. If someone is offering you feedback on something you've said or done, that we need to realize, feedback is so key to our ability to recognize and repair our inevitable and often unaware collusion with racism. And feedback is hard to give. And so how, when, and where someone gives me feedback is irrelevant. I'm going to separate the central point, the information that they're delivering to me, what I have missed. I'm going to separate that from the person and the way it was delivered, because that's not important. So, and she says, this is sort of a difficult, we have to practice at it, actually separating what is the information I need to learn from the delivery of it. And to also remember, as a white person, I am perfectly safe and I can handle it. I'm perfectly safe in conversations about racism. And if I'm feeling unsafe, or if I'm feeling, upset, or it's feeling uncomfortable, then it's my responsibility to build my racial stamina. And thank you. Thank you for the feedback. That's it. It doesn't matter how it's given. I appreciate it. So these are the real rules that she would like for white people to adhere to. And chapter 11 is called White Women's Tears. I'm curious what everyone thought about this. I feel like in the times I've talked about this book, that this chapter comes up a lot. And it's maybe surprising to people, to white people, I would assume, that there's anything controversial about someone crying in these groups. So basically, DiAngelo boils it down to, there's probably two general reasons that anyone, but that a white woman would be crying. Either, in these conversations about race, you're feeling attacked because you've been called out, or, you're feeling guilt, or you're very sad about something you've heard. You're very sad and shocked about racism and the horrors, or someone sharing their story. And so you're crying because you're sad. So you're crying because you're feeling attacked and or angry or guilty, or you're crying because you're sad. And so she says in either of those cases, that this really spells out that you first haven't done the work to understand white fragility. So, you wouldn't see it as an attack had you done the work to understand that it's not about you being a good or bad person, and people are just offering you feedback so you can move forward. And if you're shocked and sad, that just reinforces the idea that as white people, we have racial insulation and privilege of not knowing the horrors, the sadness, the reality of racism. And so I think it's just another, frustration for people of color. As she describes in the book, some of her collaborators would tell her what it feels like to see a person of color or a white person crying in these situations. It's evidence that as white people, we don't know, or we're not being sensitive to the historical context of white women's tears. She points out, in the past that, people of color, and especially men, have been murdered as a result of a white woman being upset and crying about instances, and that is history that we need to know about and be sensitive of. And she points out in the book, we all bring the history of our group with us forward. And so what happens when someone starts to cry in these groups is that all attention, time, and energy shifts to comfort the white woman that's crying. And then maybe people of color in the conversation must now comfort us when they don't feel allowed to show emotion. They feel the pressure to be stoic, to not be very emotional in these situations. But now I'm having to comfort us. And lastly, that our tears did not feel like solidarity. She mentions that it's very rare that there are true, authentic cross-racial relationships. And you might think that you are bonding with someone if they're telling a story and you're feeling emotional and you're crying in support, but to remember the whole context that maybe they don't see that as support. If this isn't a relationship that's built on trust and that you've shown support to this person before. So this is what we should keep in mind when thinking about the issue of white women's tears. Okay, and then moving on to the last chapter of the book, where do we go from here? We always want to talk about solutions, talk about, what do we really want these conversations to look like? And so here she replaces, if you remember a couple chapters ago, she described the feelings, sorry, I need to move, here we go. Feelings, behaviors, and claims of white fragility, right? So here are the feelings, behaviors, and claims of transformation. So if we've fully understood this work and this is where we want to be. So when someone is giving you feedback, you would have the feelings of gratitude, excitement, discomfort, guilt, motivation, humility, compassion, and interest. So these are the feelings that we can use to actually move forward and do this important work. The behaviors would be reflection, apology, listening, processing, engaging, grappling, seeking understanding. And then here are the claims that she would hope we would internalize or even say, I appreciate this feedback. This is very helpful. This is hard, but also important. I will focus on the message, not the messenger. It is inevitable that I have this pattern. I want to change it. I need to build my capacity to endure discomfort and bear witness to the pain of racism, and I have some work to do. And then here are the assumptions underlying this transformation. That being good or bad is not relevant. Racism is a multi-layered system embedded in our culture. We are all socialized into the system of racism. I don't expect to be aware of my bias without a lot of ongoing effort. I have blind spots on racism. I must not confuse comfort with safety. As a white person, I am safe in discussions of racism. And racism hurts people of color 24/7. Interrupting it is more important than my feelings, ego, or self-image. So these would be our new underlying assumptions that we need to write out, look at them. This is what she would see we should be internalizing. And then I like this chapter because at the beginning, she starts by describing a time that she perpetrated racism towards a woman of color. And she just describes how how that all played out and then what she did to repair the racism. And she lines it out in these 7 steps. And so once she realized that she had made a mistake, the first thing was that she processed the reaction with another white person. And she made sure to find a white person who has done this work also, who would hold her accountable, who would not be tempted to do the white solidarity thing of making her feel like, oh, that wasn't that bad. I think she just overreacted. They would actually walk her through processing her feelings of embarrassment and guilt and shame and all of these things so that the person of color would not need to do that when she goes for an apology. So she processes her reaction and her emotions with another white person, and together they identify how she reinforced racism. So she has a really good understanding, as much as she can from her white racial frame, of what she did wrong. So then she asks, step 3, ask the person that she offended to meet with them, but to also be very open about why. So I want to meet with you because I realize that I need to repair the situation. And then step 4, when she's talking to this woman, she owns the racist. She says, I did this. I should not have done this. This is what I did wrong. And then acknowledge the impact. Don't start by, my intentions were this. I never meant to say this. She just starts with, I realized that this was, had a negative impact on you, and I apologize. And then ask, is there anything else I've missed? And I think in this case there was, and she told her another bit of the situation. And then she asked, thank you for that. Is there anything else that needs to be said or heard before we can move forward? So this was a nice, I think, outline of the steps that she uses, and then they can move forward. And she said in that instance, this was a woman that she didn't know very well. And after this, this happened, and then she went through the repair process, that they moved forward. And then that relationship became one of more trust than there was before. So this is the repair. She mentions in it that she gets asked all the time by white people, what can I do? What can I do about racism? How can I learn more? And she says that she always responds back with a question: what has enabled you to be a full, educated, professional adult and not know what to do about racism? And so she says, if the answer is, I wasn't taught about it, then you need to get educated. If the answer is, well, I don't know any people of color, I don't have any Black friends, you need to build relationships. If it's, I'm in a segregated area, I'm in a white neighborhood at a white school, I work with white people, then you need to get out of your comfort zone and change your environment. And that addressing racism is not without effort. And so she says, white people need to do the work of finding out for themselves what they can do. So break with the apathy of whiteness and demonstrate that you care enough to put in the effort. And she uses the analogy in the book, if suddenly, a doctor tells you that you have this disease that you've never heard about, what would you do? You would go and you would Google the heck out of it. You would look for all the groups of all the people who know about this. You'd go to a discussion group or whatever support group. You would figure out. And so, there are so many books out there and so much writing and speaking and movies and things to take in about this topic. So we can put in the effort to find it. Okay. And then lastly, I liked this quote from the book, and I feel like it really just kind of sums up the whole situation. So she says, white people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview because it is the bedrock of our society and its institutions. The messages circulate 24/7 and have nothing to do with our intentions, awareness, or agreement. This understanding is freeing because it allows us to focus on how rather than if our racism is manifest. Stopping our racist patterns must be more important than working to convince others that we don't have them. We do have them, and people of color know we have them, and our efforts to prove otherwise are not convincing. Okay, and then last week I threw in this other article that was brought up in addition to our, reading the last 3 chapters of the book. This New England Journal of Medicine, Structural Solutions for the Rarest of the Rare, Underrepresented Minority Faculty in Medical Subspecialties. And this is great because it's some very concrete examples of the challenges. So, there's this talk of diversification and hiring people of color and wanting to have this representation in, institutions, academic medical centers, different departments, but what actually happens and what are the forces that are working against this being successful? And so if you read the article, they outlined some of the problems are that URM faculty would feel isolation, would feel the need to use adaptive behaviors like code switching to make the non-minoritized people around them feel more comfortable, that they're hyper visible, both because they, physically stand out and also because in a lot of times they're put on, they're used to showcase, look, we have people of color in our department, so they're showcased. There's the stereotype threat, that kind of really creates this narrow margin of error, because if they feel like if they mess up, then it's just validating the negative stereotype. And they then become a lightning rod for unrecognized racism when they join a department. So they're going to notice, the things that are being said, or maybe things are going to start to be said now because there's someone of color in the room, where others don't recognize it and they don't bring it up. And so they're always the reporter or having to decide not to report something or bring something up. And all of this whole list is an extreme mental and emotional burden that non-minoritized people don't have to deal with. And so this article outlines some tools for change, and it really is based on, this continuing education for leaders of the departments to advocate for URM faculty or students or, staff at any level, and that they need high quality, in-depth anti-racist trainings probably to do so. So this education, it can't just stop at implicit bias, which is great and important, but I think in this article they're saying it needs to be really in-depth training, so something that spans, a semester or a year or at least multiple training sessions, and to really understand some of these issues here on the left that people will be dealing with, and then to actively listen to URM colleagues, to listen to the issues and what they need, and that there must be time, funding, and expectations for mentorship and training for URM hires. And so a lot of times there are resources out there, but it's put on the person who's newly joined a department to sort of find for themselves, and then it just goes on top of their other expected responsibilities. And so if in the beginning it's known that these individuals will need time and funding for this, type of training to deal with the isolation, the hypervisibility, the stereotype threat, all of these things listed on the left, and that there are URM specific local and national funding opportunities that can be highlighted and encouraged. So I hope you all found this article interesting, so we can add it to our discussion. Okay, so I think that just brings us to the questions, and we can go into our breakout group. And Dr. Sparkman Barnes will host a healing space Zoom chat for any people of color who would rather go into that space. And then we will meet back here at 12:50 after the discussion. Okay, I'm ready, Alexa.